back to A Well-Designed Business. My name is Luann Nigara, and I'm so glad you found this podcast. Together with my husband Vince and our partner Bill, we have grown our company Window Works from the ground up. So I know and I understand the challenges you face in running your interior design business. I also know that your talent alone isn't enough to ensure your success. So on this podcast, we talk about strategies and practical steps to help you grow your business. But make no mistake about it, we have our share of fun here too, mixed in with those aha moments that I love so much. This isn't fluff. Nobody has time for that. Whether you are a new interior designer or a seasoned designer, I am here to help you create and to manage the kind of interior design firm that you dream of. It's straight talk and it's action. Are you ready? Let's get started. Hi, welcome to another episode of A Well-Designed Business. Today is our second installment of listener shows, The Things I Learned from a Well-Designed Business. My guest is Jason Byrne from Sydney, Australia. Jason has been a longtime supporter and cheerleader of mine and of the podcast. You'll hear me at the very beginning of the show thank him. But I wanted to add that when we share with someone how something has changed us, how something that they've done has made our day, you never know how and where and when and what that small gesture might be to the person on the other end of it. Sometimes it just hits at the right time. There were several times in this past year when Jason commented on an episode or cheered me on, like I said, but then there was this one day and this one comment that was so heartfelt, and it was just what I needed at the exact time that he sent it. So it was very significant, and I wanted to say it's a good reminder for all of us. Have you just completed a project with a kitchen contractor who was really good and had your back the whole time? Or do you have a fabric rep that is particularly attentive and always returns the calls and always, goes the extra mile to get you a discount if you need it or whatever it might be? Maybe it's time to send an email to that kitchen contractor or that wallpaper installer or that fabric rep, or maybe the boss of some of these people, and let them know how and what they do makes a difference in your business, okay? Because sometimes it is just what you need to hear. Now, you hear me all the time ask for reviews, that if you would please go to review the show on iTunes or to review my book on Amazon. And yes, I ask for these things because they are social proof to potential sponsors and clients, just like you ask your clients to review you on Houzz or to send you a testimonial that you can use on your website. But the thing is, sometimes it's just a really cool thing to see, to hear, to read, and to know that what you're doing has helped somebody. So give it a little thought. Let's all spread some love today. Show some good love to somebody that's worked with you on a recent project, and maybe you'll make their day. It might even be your client, right? Your client could have just been really, really wonderful to work with. And instead of a typical thank you, maybe send a thank you that really expresses the how and the why. It was such a good project together, okay? Alrighty, now, Jason also sent me an email about the changes he has made in his business since listening to the podcast, and today we're going to run through them. Jason Byrne Design specializes in commercial interiors. He has designed banks, office spaces, restaurants, and a current project of his is called Professional Nail at Westfield Hornsby, and this project is nominated as part of the 2018 Sydney Design Awards. When you have a chance, you should check it out on his website. It's fresh. It's beautiful. It's very nice, beautiful nail salon that he designed. And in fact, if you're listening to this in real time, the awards are open through, I want to say, the end of April. And you can, if you like the project and think it's worthy, go over and rate it and, vote for him. So how you would do that is that you would go to drivenbydesign.com. So what it is it's drivenxdesign.com. drivenxdesign.com. If you scroll to where it says Sydney Design Awards, and then in the search put Jason Byrne Design, and this project will come up. And if you love it, why don't you give him a little love and vote for his project, okay? All right, now let's hear what Jason Byrne has done in his business since listening to A Well-Designed Business. Hi, Jason. Thanks so much for joining me on A Well-Designed Business today.
Hi, Luann. How are you? Thank you so much for having me on your show.
I am great, and I am happy to share that you are my second airing of the things I learned from A Well-Designed Business listener version. So,
Fantastic.
I know. So, Jason, I first just want to share with everybody that you have been such a kind supporter of mine for several months now. You have emailed me one time with this list of things that you have done in your business based on listening to the podcast, and you have given me specific support on particular subjects that you have listened to the show and really liked. And the one that comes to mind most is the vendor show, the solo show I did on vendors. You sent me the most amazing email the next day thanking me for that show and telling me that it really resonated with you. So I have thanked you privately off air, but I wanted to publicly thank you for that because it really was very special to me, and it was a very heartfelt note that you sent. So thank you so much.
Oh, Luann, you're more than welcome.
All righty. So let's get into this. What we're going to do is, since this is the things I learned from A Well-Designed Business show, we're going to talk about the things that you've learned. But I just want to first comment on two things that I learned by watching and reading your website and the information that you sent me. The first is that you have a mission statement for your design firm. And just the fact that you have one makes me smile ear to ear. And I love your mission statement for the design firm. I want to share it, and I want you to talk to us a little bit about it. So it's called Delivering Excellence Through Communication and Design. So tell us a little bit about how did you arrive at this mission statement, because I know from coaching and working with designers that sometimes that's a stumbling block. They're like, I'm not sure what my mission statement is. Tell us about yours and why it means and what it means to you.
Absolutely, and thank you for asking. Like everybody, mission statements are hard, and trying to understand what I wanted from my mission statement was difficult for myself as well. But it really came down to when I was speaking to myself and then listening to feedback coming from my clients and asking my clients how they felt working with me and how that fitted in with how I like to work. I realized that one of the things that I enjoy most in dealing with my clients is that they get a good design, but also how we communicate that design to them, be it beautiful drawings, but also receiving information from them, giving them information, that actually that part of the process for a client is vitally important so that they feel comfortable with me as a designer. And I wanted to make sure that my firm could sum up not just that we done beautiful design, but that we communicated with you and we communicated the design to you in an excellent fashion.
It's awesome. I just love it. And you know what I love in there? I love that you express that one of the ways that you gain clarity on this is by asking your clients what it is that they liked when working with you. And we have said that before on the show, that we've said, if you're not sure, I think Nicole Heimer of Curio Electro, as a matter of fact, I'm going to say it was definitely her. Others may have also, but I know that Nicole Heimer, who is a branding expert and website developer, which is just such a small word compared to what she actually does, I'm just going to say. Okay. But she said the same thing. If you're not sure, ask your client why they choose to work with you and ask your client what they liked about working with you. And so when you did that, obviously you were told that your clients appreciate your talent and your design, but they expressed that they liked the communication process with you.
Yes, and that was kind of it's very interesting because you have ideas of how you feel you work yourself and how they fit in with what you think you do for your clients. But to hear that back from your client, and also some ways that you can improve on that for your client, and also some things that you'd forgotten you'd done or never even knew that you'd done for your clients. So that's how that arrived at for me, and something that I'm quite passionate about, because there's many, many people who can design beautiful things, but probably the communication of that is probably more of an art form. And I like to think that that's something that I enjoy, and hopefully I do quite well for my clients.
I love it. I think it's awesome. And of course, it leads into one of the things that you share with me, because when you're a guest on my show, I send a questionnaire out, right, for you to think about. Half the time I don't even ask the questions on the darn questionnaire. I have to say not even half the time, 98% of the time. Okay. But I actually send it mostly to get you, each of you, thinking about your business and what it is that you do, because a lot of times we don't take the time to sit still and think about what we do in our business and how we do it. Okay. And so I think that that's good. And so whether I ask that question or not, if most of the guests take it very seriously and answer the questions. And one of the questions I asked is advice or tips for your colleagues. And you said less than good news must be delivered by phone or in person, and then followed up in email for a record. And that to me leads right back to your mission, which is delivering excellence through communication and design. So I 100,000,000% agree with less than good news has to be delivered in person or on phone. Talk to us a little bit about that, because that is sometimes very intimidating for somebody in business to do, whether they're new in business or 25 years in business, is to deliver bad news personally. Talk to us a little bit about how you do it and why you know it's so important, Jason.
Oh, absolutely, Luann. It's very daunting to deliver news that the client doesn't want to hear, or probably news that might be embarrassing, or something didn't go a particular way, or somebody else in the loop hasn't managed to get everything done exactly how you want to get it done. And I was remembering when dealing with clients that actually what should be paramount, that the client is never in the dark. And part of emailing somebody is you can never tell the tone or how the inflection of that email is going to be received by the other party. So I developed this feeling and this way of that all the time when I'm dealing with my client. If it's good news, it's preferable to call as well and speak with the clients and give them the good news. But if it's something that's not particularly enjoyable to hear, or there's a delay in the project, or our lease didn't get signed, or furniture is not going to be delivered, you should have respect for your client to speak with them one-on-one, go through the process, guide them through what happened, and let them hear in your voice that you understand that this is less than good news, and that you're there for them, and that you're doing everything possible, and that they're valuable to you and they're worth the phone call, rather than just a quick email straight off that could be as impassioned and could be as equally caring, but probably doesn't quite feel it.
Right, right. And I have to say, for me, I also find the value of delivering it in person, like we're saying, either on the phone or in person, is because sometimes the things that we are most sure that is going to be the biggest issue or the most discomfort for the client is not. And when we are on the phone with them and we learn that that's not the thing that's upsetting them, that could be something else that's upsetting them. If you're doing an email, you're directing all of your energy and your explanation and your conversation towards something that they're like, yeah, but what about this? This is what I'm mad about. And you don't have the opportunity to know that. And so now we've just furthered a bad situation, because they're just feeling like they could assume you're avoiding it, but you don't even know it, right?
Completely. And as like we were saying a little earlier in our conversation, with the email, you don't quite know how it's going to land, how it's going to be received, or indeed where the client's placing the weight on that particular conversation.
Right.
Whereas on the telephone and you're speaking, you can gauge whether that is important to them or not, or actually what are the next steps that can be actioned by you as the designer quicker through the telephone. And speaking with the client, they can give you that feedback immediately and you can act on it immediately. That's really, really important. Whereas the email, I found in my experience, only just builds anxiety for everybody.
Right, right, right. And also, too, I would say this goes for anything that, I love your way of terming it, less than good news, as opposed to, the poopy hit the fan and I have to tell you about it. But
yes.
I mean, the thing is, what I also know to be true is that there's times that we have to deliver less than good news that is out of our control. UPS didn't deliver a box, or the shipper, their warehouse, had a flood and you can't get their product out. There's times that you actually have no control over it, but there's also times when it has been caused by you, whether it's you or your company, you're somebody on your staff. And in those times, you definitely have to just own it. I had a situation just last week where I made a big mistake, and I sat there and I thought about it, and I went for a drive to, one of my projects, and I came back and I was just like, Luann, there's no way around this. You made this mistake. You just got to call her. And I called the designer and I said, yada, yada. I just said to her, I said, listen, I said, you have 5 minutes? She says, yeah. I said, I have very uncomfortable news I have to share with you. I said, I dropped the ball. This is what happened. I already understand how it got out of my system because there's 2 checks that should have caught this. I've already figured out how it got out of the system. It won't happen again, but it happened to you. And I'm sorry. And shall I call your client? What do you want to do? And you know what she said? She goes, you know what, Luann? She goes, I'm so grateful that you didn't call up and tell me a bunch of stuff. She goes, you know what? Things happen. I'm a human being. You're a human being. My client's a human being. Thank you so much. When do you think you can resolve it? I said, I probably can wrap it up in about 3 weeks. And she said, okay, that's the best you can do. I'm happy. Thank you for being honest. Have a great day. I mean, you see, if I sent an email, I might have done just as good in an email. And she might have said, oh, no worries. You're human. But I would have been like, what does that mean? Is that good? Is that bad? Is that this? Are you really fine?
Absolutely.
So, it's not easy. It's, and I always say you have to be willing to have the hard conversation. And you know me, Jason, because you listen to the show. Lee Cockrell, his Power Talk Friday, when you do the hard things, everything else gets easier. When you take the easy way out, everything else gets harder, right?
It's so true. It's so true.
So.
And I think a lot of people may not appreciate that while that is a hard thing to do, to make that phone call, even if it's delayed for 24 hours, the ramifications can be huge.
Oh, yes.
It's really, really important to just grasp the nettle.
That's right.
And make that decision, speak with your clients, because when they have the information, they're in power again and they can make the decisions that they need to make. But it's really unfair as a professional to remove that from them for even a day.
Yes.
That's just
Right,
criminal.
it's disrespectful.
It's not correct.
Right,
yes.
Exactly. I love it. So I just wanted to take the time to have that little conversation because I thought it was so powerful, the way that you have expressed your mission, and that when you were asked to give a tip to a colleague, that this was what came to mind. So thank you for sharing all of that. Now, let's get to the things that you learn from a well-designed business.
Yay.
So
many things.
Yes, and that's funny because you sent me a list of 4, and then when I pointed out to you, you're like, oh, I have way more than that. So, but the thing is, one of the first things that you mentioned is that you created a schedule of fees and a job run sheet. So tell us what those mean to you, what those each are, and how you came to do this from listening to the guests on the show.
Of course, I suppose maybe just a slight step backwards.
Okay.
While listening to A Well-Designed Business and the general flavor of it over the last while that I've listened to it, and I very much enjoyed the show, I was thinking about how all these things could impact my business and how I can absorb them into my business. But I was also trying to find out what was the main flavor that I received from your show, perhaps maybe not what came from your show. And what I was thinking was, for myself, that I work on my own, was that a lot of the tips and information and ideas that come from your show, I was thinking these are kind of how I'm absorbing them is more of an administration and the things and the processes and the systems I should set up. And I was thinking, how can I bring that into my business where it's really, really enjoyable sitting down and working on the design of something and coming up with new ideas and new ways to represent something or improve the flow of a customer's business through your design and therefore make them more money so that they can get you to design more shops, which is fabulous. How can I, as somebody who works on myself, improve my systems rather than just put in more hours? So I suppose I started taking from your show all those things where people were going, you need to have a system. You need to understand how you develop your fees, what works for you. You need to reflect back on previous jobs, on previous fee proposals that you've given to clients, and understand where you did make money, where you didn't make as much money, where your client could have got information from you quicker, where in your workflow or my workflow could I have been faster? Where do I spend most money on my projects? So I started to develop this Excel document that brought me through how I calculate my fees, because I found creating a fee proposal for me used to be a bit of a beast where it would take a lot of time to go through a fee proposal. And I was anxious about sending them out to my clients because you want to make sure that you're not being rude to your client or being too slow in giving it to your client. So I wanted to really understand how I built up my fees. So I looked at all my previous fee proposals, how I worked them out, where they came from, and then I started putting some rules and formulas together and started using that on particular fee proposals when I was sending out to clients. So I was sure that it was actually something that actually mirrored what I'd done before I created this document. So I was testing it for myself. So I found out where my fees, how I was happy with them, but also then how that fee broke down into the various stages of how I work on a project, which is for me typically 6 stages. What percentage of my fee goes towards each of those stages? And then within that stage, what percentage of that fee is then split between all the various components that go up to make that stage? So from that perspective of the fee proposal, it was actually interesting to see where I was serving my client best in terms of the fee I was giving them, but also serving my office best in working through what I had to do to be able to execute that part of the fee. Then I was able to look at that by teasing that out further. And in my document, I start going through then to be able to understand how I run a project. What are the things that have to happen in particular throughout that stage? So in stage 1, which is typically the client coming in touch with me and we're talking about their project and understanding their fee, there's actually 7 bullet points with actually taking an email from a client and preparing a fee schedule. And why I've done all these things, Luann, is if I have worked all this out, which I feel I've worked out to a good amount of detail, and I've placed a time budget beside it, then I can devote myself completely, within reason, for my client to actually do the fun side of the job, the beautiful side of the job, knowing that I've almost got this assistant in the background that I've created that's managing the administration of the project. And I know what's happening when it's happening and how that then feeds all the other documents that I've created so that my client is completely informed. One of the things I noticed from listening to your show was an area that people struggle with, and I struggled with, is while we're busy at our desks and drawing and creating and picking, and we feel like we're doing an amazing job and producing great results, sometimes our client isn't fully aware of how much work we're doing, and all they get to see is the beautiful presentation 2 weeks later, but they're not aware of everything that you've done or is about to happen, which sometimes can make them anxious. I mean, they don't need to understand every single thing we do as an administration-wise, but I tried to create a document, which we might speak a bit about later, which was an email document, which actually lets them know the progress of how a project is developing, what we've done, what's the next steps, and what's happening for them later, so that I email that out every Friday, and it's fed directly from this Excel document. So that of a Friday, when they wake up Saturday morning or having a glass of wine Friday evening, they can look at where their project is. It goes through all the stages, what has been happening, when it was actioned, what's happening next. And it's a little database for them to go, oh, look at where we're progressing to and how we're working. So that's how that document became.
So, okay, so get me to, is it possible to get me to some of the specifics of the document? So what I'm hearing in there, first of all, what I'm hearing in there is that it's a culmination of many, many guests who express that.
Absolutely.
Right. Okay. So I'm hearing that. It's, many guests over and over have expressed that when the clearer you are in your system and the clearer you understand step 1, step 2, step, B, C, D, then you are free-minded, basically, to not worry about, running in a circle and chasing your tail. So I'm hearing that. But tell me about, if you can, what does it look like? So you have did you say a 6-step process that you just said? I'm looking for my notes. You have a 6-step process with a client, stages, and tell us a little bit about that. So when you onboard a client, let's maybe do this. You also, one of your things is that you created a questionnaire for onboarding a client, and that also came from listening to the show. So is that the first step after the initial phone call, or is the questionnaire first and then the phone call, and then you lead into these other things?
Okay, so to prepare my schedule of fees, typically you might get an email from a client or a very quick phone call from the client to say they're interested in hiring you and this is their particular project. And from that phone call or email, if it's an email, I'll always follow up with a phone call about, tell me about your project. Mm-hmm. I want to know, A, what their budget is. Sometimes people are particularly shy about telling your budget, but you can kind of understand from how they talk about their proposal what they want and the level of finish that they're going to do, what type of business they're running. So then from that, I will send them a fee proposal of this is the size. So I will also ask them the square meterage of their unit that they want to open up. So I know what size it is. I know what type of business they're running. I know whether they want graphics involved or not, all the things that build up my fee. I will send them a fee proposal, which I work on not an hourly rate for the client. I work on a flat fee, but within that, I've already worked out through this document, I know how many hours it takes me to do this, that, and the other. So if somebody rings up and says, oh, I've got a 200 square meter shop, I know from experience, but also this document, okay, this actually takes this long to actually the administration of the project, the sourcing of items for the project, and the actual sitting down and drawing of the project and sending it to the client. Within that, then I do, as you said, I have 6 stages. So I have a stage 1, which is the orientation and definition, which is then getting in touch with the client, sending the fee proposal. So after they've done a fee proposal, they've received my fee proposal, they sign my fee proposal saying they're happy with the level of fees. I then send them the client questionnaire brief, which is quite a big document. But from that, then there's a lot of questions that help me start to create what their brief is, what the project entails, how it's going to look, how it's going to smell, what type of music will be played, how we will go through all those things. I try to pose all the questions, Luann, in very kind of opposing ways. I'm not sure if you remember from reading the document. And that document is sent not as a stop, and that's the only thing that's going to form the brief. It gets the client thinking about their project in ways that maybe they didn't think before. And then I also have a sit down that follows that brief. So those questions really, when they send them back to me, it's then when we sit down and talk and the things that they tell me through that discussion that helps me form my return brief back to the client. But it's something I particularly enjoy when you're sitting down with a client. You understand from how they're talking with you, and the things that they leave out of the conversation often help build a brief much quicker than the things that they actually do tell you. So I like to think that I'm particularly good at that when I sit down with a client and I'm talking with them. Quite often I hear back from my clients that, oh, I wasn't aware that's what I was asking for. But as soon as I seen your proposal, Jason, I was really delighted. Of course, that's what I want.
Nice.
And that's the part that I enjoy the most. But it was actually the creating of that questionnaire from little tips here and there on your show where people were talking about, oh, when I was working on this project, the lady said this, but she meant that.
Right.
Or when I was working on this project, the person had this idea, but from talking to their husband, actually you can understand that this is actually how they have dinner in the evening, which informs something else, which actually then is actually the thing that the client wants.
Right. Yeah, you do. You have to listen all along for the things that are said. And when something is said, I always say you have to rephrase it and clarify it and send it back to them, and say, oh, I understood you to mean this. And then sometimes when you do that, they look at you like, no, that's not what I meant. That's not what I said. And I'm like, okay, and I misunderstood. So what did you mean when you said X, Y, Z, right? Or it's like you said, sometimes it's in the unsaid. And that only comes from, continually asking questions and trying to get to the nitty-gritty of things, right?
And also, yes, I completely agree. But also, if somebody has a meeting with you and they tell you that, oh, I really, really love, Jason, modern industrial, and you're sitting down and you're talking, if you just take that as, okay, so they want a modern industrial fit out to this store, if you don't ask additional questions and come at it from different angles, your version of modern industrial may be completely different to how your client thinks of modern industrial. That actually was a beautiful hairdressing salon they went to 6 weeks ago, and they were told that was modern industrial, but actually is something completely different. So you actually have to keep working and working and working, and then you have to ask your client if you have understood them correctly.
Right, exactly. Well, and it's true because, there may be an actual, from an interior design professional standpoint, a recognizable definition of modern industrial, but if your client uses it and means it a different way, you didn't get any brownie points for delivering technically modern industrial. You're going to end up with an unhappy client, and then you can debate all day long that it's modern industrial. It's not going to get you anywhere.
And importantly, you've spent 2 weeks of their time and money sourcing your version of modern industrial, only to find out that the problem with the whole situation was not what the client thought of modern industrial. It was that you didn't understand what they were telling you.
Right, and you didn't take the time to understand it, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. And that's really, really important. So I think in my brief, the questionnaire that I sent the client, I asked the same question maybe 4 or 5 different ways throughout the whole document, to be able to then cross-reference when I get it back going, oh, okay. So it seems like we have a consensus here.
Right.
Or if we're getting lots of different answers about the one question that I'm asking, then that definitely, when we sit down and talk and have a nice cup of coffee together, what is it you mean about this? Let's go and have a look at an example. Right. Tell me why you feel that's a good store and a good example of modern industrial.
Right. And so do you utilize, do you have your own photographs saved on an iPad? Do you utilize Pinterest? What do you utilize in order to use what images? Where do you use your own work? What do you do? How do you do that?
If we're narrowing down what a client means.
Right. So if somebody has discussed on their questionnaire modern industrial, and they've crossed it up, they've answered it enough times to they're clear what it is, but how do you get clear on what it is for them?
Typically, I ask them for an example of where they felt that this modern industrial was used well.
Oh, okay.
And if it's in Sydney, I like to go and visit it with them.
Okay.
If it's not in Sydney, then I source images maybe from Pinterest or just Google of that store. But also, I think kind of talking with the client, and then maybe later on in the conversation, I will circle back and go, oh, have you been to this particular new shopping district? What did you think of this store? And in my mind, I'm going, for me, that's an example of modern industrial. Let's see how that lands with the client when we're not actually talking on that topic anymore.
Right.
Because then you'll see whether they light up or whether they acknowledge it. Oh, that's a great example, Jason. Actually, that was something I was thinking would be nice for my store.
Right.
Or they might actually surprise you and go, oh, that's horrific.
Yes,
I make sure that we don't do that.
That's modern transitional.
Yes, that's not what I meant at all.
Oh, is that what that is? Thank you for clearing that up. Okay.
So lots of different ways to do it. But if I can, and I really try very hard to take most of my meetings where the client is going to have their new shop or where they have existing shops, and to try and have a walk around that particular area with them, with their time allowing, to understand what's good and the positioning. And this is slightly off the topic of your question, but I like to, when I'm talking with the client at that moment, I like to go just through at that very early stage. Oh, if we're walking along the street now, let's have a look. That's a really strong elevation of your building. That's a really particular, look at where all the foot traffic's coming from. Look at where all the cars have to stop. So I can say to the client, so when I come back to you with my proposal, let's have a look at, I'm going to say to you that that's a way that we're going to be able to increase foot traffic for you, because that's going to be a really worth spending money on that wall, even though you might see in the store that it's not particularly doing a whole lot. But from the outside, it's doing a whole lot. So I'm almost trying to preempt the client, that they know what's kind of coming without seeing the design. So I'm trying to build a little bit of excitement as well.
That's nice. That's good. I mean, if the relation to a residential designer is walking the home. So you walk the neighborhood, the shop, the environment that the place is in, the store is in. And you're right. Somebody could look at a side wall of their building and not realize its importance and just think they're talking about the front. But if everybody walks through the alley of that side wall to get to the front because the parking's in the back, then it could really be a feature as opposed to just this ugly alley wall, right?
Absolutely. And how can we use it best?
Okay, I love it. Okay,
budget allowing.
So the huge thing in there is listening, is asking and listening, asking and listening. Say it over and over and over again. I love it. I love it. I love it. Okay. Now you do this graphic timeline to the client, and you said that you gather that from the different episodes as well. So is that at the beginning? Have we crossed over and we've done our our proposal, and now you give a graphic timeline, or is that part of that weekly email update?
So what I do is, yes, I create a return brief. So I've sent the clients my creative brief questionnaire. I meet with the client, and then I sit down and I actually start to distill what the client has told me. Importantly, they've told me what their handover date is, i.e., when do they have to move in, when are they paying rent for in that particular building. So that's our have to meet moment. So that has to be correct. So then from that, the Excel document starts telling me, okay, so the size of the store, this is the particular amount of time that's going to take you to produce that. So from that handover date, I can start counting back my weeks. Will it be 4 weeks on site that it needs to be built? Will it be 2 weeks made of joinery? Will we have 2 weeks going for the legal documents? All these things that make up a project. And I was finding that unless the client is very au fait with what we're doing, as in they've done a lot of stores, some of them weren't particularly aware that it's not just producing a pretty drawing and then they're open next week. There's actually a lot of people involved in the process. So when I send them the return brief, which goes through what I've understood they've said, what I think is the way forward, I then start listening. These are listing, I beg your pardon. I start listing, these are the 6 stages, which they already know about because they can see them as part of my fee proposal. And then I say that stage 6 will be the end of the project. That's the handover date. So this is the date. So that gets filled in the graphic timeline. And then I start building backwards to where we are today, that they signed the fee proposal. And there's little bubbles on that get increasingly darker as we reach the goal of the handover date. And I found that when I've sent this to clients,
D-Day,
it's just a 5-minute little exercise for me, but it's something that then helps the client visualize the process of how they're going, when we're getting there, what's the next stage. All these things that I've tried to create and put out there for my clients is that they understand where they are in the process, and to take that away from them, that worry of when is it going to be produced, when is it going to be there. They know the handover date and they know we're going to meet that, but quite often people might get worried about have we issued the tender? Is he on ball that we're going to make sure the tender is going to get issued at this time? And you're going through the stages. So this little tiny document helps people visualize that, and they can see that we're moving through and there's a game plan.
I love it. I'm going to tell you what, there's a couple of things that I love in there, particularly for your expertise in design and commercial design. I think that it's almost a little bit more important, because when we're doing residential design, when a designer's doing residential design, the homeowner is often, well, not always, but often living in the house or access to the house or whatever, and it's sort of going along around them. Not that the timeline is not important or valuable, but I also think that it's a little bit easier for us to visualize. Well, we can't have the tub in until the floor's in, and I don't see the floor, so I don't have to ask where the tub is. But in commercial design, there are so many things that happen with permits and stuff like that, that as the consumer, we are not always aware of. I just have to say, I think that it always comes down to agreements and communication and knowing things up front. And I think with every project, it's valuable for the client to know, like you also mentioned in the beginning, sometimes they have no idea how much goes into what you're doing at your desk to come up with what is a half-hour presentation that just looks like you just popped it out of your brain, right?
And that's absolutely, and there's lots of stuff that they pay us a lot of money that they shouldn't know because we're taking that away from them. But one word you used earlier was really interesting, to disconnect. What I've tried to do with all these documents is that if the client wishes, when they open that email, they can be part of the connection. They don't have to be disconnected. Right. I'm not ramming information down their throat, but it is there if they're sitting there on Saturday morning going, what's happening with this project?
Right. I wonder
they can
where
open up the email and go every Friday, oh, look, he's on stage 4. That's fantastic.
Right.
Oh, look, we're expecting the council approval next week. Oh, actually, the RDM of the shopping centre is telling us that modern industrial is not for them. We have to change the scheme.
Right.
So all these things that the client then can go, oh, okay, and just give them a sense of ease so that then we can just go away and enjoy the pretty design.
Yeah, I love it. I think it's awesome. And the other thing, I have a quick question for you. Do you find ever, because this would make me crazy, but do you find that when you are doing your commercial design that a client will actually mislead you on the handover date? Or is that just, no, Luann, we're spending too much money and they know that I'm a person on their team that has to be trusted and they have to give me the right date?
Well, on many of my commercial projects, you might be doing them within a shopping center. So maybe a Westfield or something like that. And even if the client did want to mislead you that it needed to be finished sooner or earlier, the RDM, the retail design manager, will be inside the loop. Okay. And you'll be working closely with them and the client, and they'll be under no doubt telling you this is the handover date because they're charging rent from this date, whether your design is finished or not.
Okay. Because, you know, that happens to us a lot in residential. I'm having a party and they push it back 2 weeks later, and then you find out, oh, it really wasn't this weekend. Thanks for that. So, okay. All right. I love it. And then the weekly client email. I want to say, I think that was Laura Umansky that told us about that. I want to say it was, I feel like it was Laura Umansky. It was the first time that we heard on the show that I feel like Laura has a little glass of champagne with her team every Friday, and that they also have the email going out. I could be wrong. There's now over 300 shows. I'm not really remembering as many things and as details.
I can't remember the person's name, but somebody on your program, and that's why I have this email, said you should send out an email every Friday to your client. Right. And even if you don't have any news, it should be a joke of the day or something.
Yes, right, right.
That struck such a chord with me. I was like, absolutely. Yes. Why shouldn't the client feel as informed as you are? So that's why I developed it directly from that lady. Sadly, I don't know her name, so sorry.
Yeah, I think it was Laura. I'm not 100% sure. But it's so funny because for 100 years in Window Works, we do that on Wednesday. So we send, we've always done it on Wednesday. Wednesday, it started with problems because Wednesday is problem day at Window Works. And what that means is every Wednesday, our showroom admin is tasked with getting the actual details of every single project that has a problem on it. So, if we need a replacement part, or fabric is back ordered, or fabric is flawed, or, whatever it might be. And then she is also tasked with updating every client with the progress of nailing down the problem. And at one point we realized, why? This is like years ago. We went, well, if we're going through that, why aren't we telling all the happy people where their products is right now? Like, you're 2 weeks into your order. Yes. It should be another la la la, So it does. It just takes anxiety away. It takes the phone call of what's going on. It's like, there's a lot going on. What do you mean?
Yes.
So I love it. Now, I recently had a listener. Her name is Sarah, and she didn't include her interior design firm name. But Sarah asked me to start to ask some guests about tech that they use on the design side of their business. And I'm just going to tell everybody what's really hysterical is, off air, I said to Jason, I just got this email. What do you think about, you happen to mention that you use 8 different technologies in running your interior design business. Do you feel comfortable discussing this? Because it would be fun to share it. And then Jason said to me, well, actually, I used to teach design technology at the Sydney Design School. So I was like, jackpot, universe. Okay. So tell us, you happen to use in your firm AutoCAD, Revit, SketchUp, Maxwell Render, Photoshop, Lightroom, InDesign, and Illustrator. That's probably there's probably way too much in those 8 things to talk about in the next 15 minutes or so. But what would you say if, based on her question and based on your knowledge of teaching it and using it, what was the first things that come to your mind in talking about technology to a new designer?
Of course, I suppose you have to decide what type of firm you want to be, and whether you're going to go very traditional and just make physical mood boards and hand sketch, or maybe some hand drafting that you're going to send your client, and some hand renders. That works incredibly well for some firms. And indeed, that's when I first left college. That's all we did. But then as I started to mature and started to go to offices and learn in those offices, probably for me, it made more sense that I'd switch over to drawing on computers, just because revisions and edits are so much quicker. And the first program that I learned how to use was AutoCAD. And I then, as you said, started to teach that program in Sydney Design School, where I worked for 2 years. I find AutoCAD myself a really easy program to use. I use AutoCAD Lite, so I just use it in a 2D way. I don't do it in a 3D way. AutoCAD for me is incredibly simple. When I was teaching it, I like to bring everybody down to, you're just drawing on the computer just like you would when you're hand drafting. And if you know how to draw a circle and draw a line, that basically is every drawing that you're ever going to make in the computer. It's just up to your talent then how you're going to bring those circles and lines and make something that's going to be really beautiful. But being on the computer, when the client changes their mind, which probably happens more often than not, the computer allows for the rapid changes, and therefore you to make a little more money, because you're not redrawing the whole project each time, which you have to do if you're hand drafting. So AutoCAD's a great program for that, and probably because I've used it over 20 years now, I think it's incredibly simple. But what I could see when I was teaching it at Sydney Design School is actually a very easy skill for people to pick up quite quickly.
Okay.
So I found AutoCAD in that respect. People really got on board very quickly with it. They understood the basics of it very quickly, and they could very rapidly with AutoCAD, I felt, take very small learnings and turn them into quite beautiful drawings if they're guided properly. So AutoCAD would be my main tool that I work with all the time in terms of producing 2Ds, plans, sections, elevations. I use Revit as well, which we also teach at Sydney Design School. And Revit is from the same company as AutoCAD, which is Autodesk. And I won't say it's a 3D program, even though it is a 3D program, but it's basically a BIM. So it's a model of the whole project. and every single facet of it. You're not doing a plan, you're not doing a section, you're doing an elevation. You're building up a whole 3D representation of your whole project, of which at any time in Revit you can call off a plan, a section, or an elevation, because it's the one model all the time that's just giving you all those different options to view it that way. Whereas if you bring that back to AutoCAD, you're actually doing a digital drafting drawing on the computer. If you change something, you are still changing that drawing, albeit quicker than hand drafting. Whereas if you in Revit change something like move a sofa from one side of the room to the other, it updates in every single view in Revit, because the view is actually a live version of what you've just done, if that makes sense.
Okay.
So Revit is an amazing program. And I particularly like to use Revit myself. How I find it really useful for me is doing sites and finding out the topography and doing the sections as a broad overview of a project. And that's where I find Revit for me is invaluable to understand the context of the site. With SketchUp, which I have to say, I love the program. There's far more sophisticated 3D programs out there. I like SketchUp because of its complete simplicity, and I'm incredibly guilty of spending hours and hours and hours in the evening of playing with a model and making it more beautiful, having fun with it and changing things, that I actually have to continually remind myself that actually this is a business, Jason, that you need to pull back slightly and be aware that actually it's so much fun that can only play a small role. Sorry, Luann. You have to physically stop myself from SketchUp. And it's incredibly easy. And it's a 3D model that's basically you draw a square, you push and polish, you give it shape, you draw another square, you take shapes away from that, and then it starts becoming stuff. Wow. And it's incredibly rapid to become quite good at that program. And again, that's also something that we teach at Sydney Design School. And then that brings me to Maxwell Render. So SketchUp is really good at producing a model, but it doesn't actually produce beautiful renders that look like photographs on its own. You need a tack-on program. So the one that I like to use is Maxwell Render. Because SketchUp is so quick, it's really good at what it does, which is building a model, showing you views of that model and giving you a realistic view of what it is. So you can set up your view of what you've designed, how it looks, how you want your client to see it. But then if you want it to become realistic, you would use a rendering program, and I choose Maxwell Render. And also that allows you to put artificial light into your model, whereas SketchUp does not allow for artificial light. It only does the natural light from the sun. So if you're going to put LED light under a counter or drop some pendants or do some spotlights, while you can draw them in SketchUp and give the look and the feel of the housing, it's a program like Maxwell Render that allows you to put the artificial light into that model so that when you render it, you can see the effect of that light.
Wow.
So, and those two programs, SketchUp and Maxwell Render, you use in tandem with each other. Okay. But Maxwell Render is a tack-on program. You can use it at Revit and lots of other programs. It's just a render engine where you press the button after you've done all the background stuff, and it produces the photograph.
Oh,
if that makes sense.
Yep, it does.
So it doesn't physically print it, it just makes one on your computer.
Okay.
And it's really beautiful to watch, actually. It's a very slow process. One of the things the students often are aghast with when you're showing them these programs, you think you press the button and hey presto, there's your beautiful finished image. It actually does tiny little dots of light all over your screen. And the longer you leave it rendering, the more high res and the more beautiful that image becomes. So if you leave it rendering for an hour, it's a shockingly bad image. If you leave it going for 8 hours, 24 hours, it becomes more and more beautiful with much more detail.
You know what's interesting about that is I'll tell you the exact analogy to podcasting. One of the things that I'm often complimented on is the sound of our show. And the quality of the sound of our show. And it's so funny because everybody knows that it's my Uncle Bill that does the editing and the sound of the show. And we've had conversations where I will go to a podcast convention and people will say to me, oh, it takes for 1 hour podcast, it should take about 1 hour to edit the show. And he has said to me, That's crazy. It could take me 7 or 8 hours to render the show. And I go, whatever that means. You know what I mean? But, he's a professional, has been in this business for 40 years, not podcasting, but audio, video. And I think maybe I just learned what the difference is in my sound because he renders my sound.
Well, and it sounds fantastic compared to a lot of podcasts where they can be echoey and not quite as professional sounding.
Right.
So Bill is doing an excellent job.
That's right. So, but that's interesting that you say the same thing there, that it could render in an hour, but if you let it render over, 24 hours, it's going the same program and the same materials that it's working with, the same photograph or initial drawing that it's working with, are going to be two completely different levels of quality. That's very interesting.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
And also one of the most frustrating things about the program, because no matter how good you are at executing a timeline, you will never quite get the render time correctly because you will want slightly better image, and the computer will tell you, well, I can deliver that in 24 hours. And you're like going, well, the meeting's in 20 minutes, so that's not happening.
And you're like, excuse me, Mr. Computer Man, let's snap it. Let's snap to it.
The constant battle.
That's it. So that's interesting. And so with these 4 programs that you're talking about, are they all useful for both commercial and residential designers, or are like this series of this 4? I can see how one each builds onto its other. Would you, and I understood, by the way, your first initial question was, which I love, is start with your why. What do you want from it? What kind of firm do you want to be? So we both know that there are hundreds of interior designers, thousands of interior designers all listening now, that really a mood board, like you said, some drawings and some pictures gathered from Pinterest are all they need to relay their vision and to communicate their joint vision with their client back and forth to each other, right? So that's true. So, but
indeed, they might be the most suitable things for that particular client. Some clients are really off-put by seeing a big computer drawing that looks maybe harsher than a beautiful hand-rendered drawing.
Right, or
so
intimidated by it, right? They feel like,
exactly.
Yeah, like, I don't know how to read a blueprint. I don't know how to read a floor plan. Why are you getting, they feel funny. They feel like they might feel a little at a disadvantage, feel a little dumb for not understanding it. So I understand that. So, but say, you want to be the firm that does everything by drawings and so forth. Is this out the gate, a newer designer should invest in all 4 of these, or hey, start here, build, or is it like the way you explain, it's all 4 work together from the beginning?
Okay, I wouldn't say it's all 4 from the beginning. What I would say of those, when I listed AutoCAD, Revit, SketchUp, and Maxwell Render, AutoCAD, I think, would be a basics get started.
That's
get
a
going
non-negotiable. With. You need to learn that, right? That's what you're saying. Okay.
And SketchUp, I think, is a good introduction for anybody, irregardless of what 3D program they end up using.
Okay.
So SketchUp, as part of the education that I used to give, SketchUp was a good introduction to let people know what they could do with Revit. Revit is a much more sophisticated beast, I beg your pardon. But when you learn SketchUp, you start appreciating in the computer about 3D, whereas when you're in AutoCAD, you're looking at flats. Okay. Everything's flat all the time. There's also a huge cost implication. AutoCAD is more affordable than Revit, and SketchUp is definitely more affordable than AutoCAD or Revit. Okay. So AutoCAD is, you can rent by the month or by the year, and it's a significant spend, but a good spend. Okay. Revit is infinitely more expensive, as it probably should be, because the benefits of that program are gigantic and enormous. I personally feel, myself, that it's easier to go from AutoCAD to Revit because a lot of the fundamentals of AutoCAD feed into Revit before you start learning more of the complex issues within Revit. SketchUp, a 4-year-old could pick it up tomorrow, and if they couldn't, I'd be slightly worried for them.
Oh.
Very, very, very easy program.
Okay.
And it looks I used to always say it looked very Disneyfied. Everything, To draw a line, you click on the pencil because that's what draw lines. To push and pull, you click on the arrow because doesn't that push and pull? Everything's really, really simple, clear, and very easy to understand.
Okay. So it's great. Now, I'm sure everybody knows the answer. I don't. Do you need to take a course to learn AutoCAD, or can you purchase it and tutorial yourself through it?
I would recommend that you have a look around the program, watch a few tutorials, but probably most people would be better off taking a quick course and understanding the best workflow in using the program and starting with the basics and how you can build on them, because it's probably a better use of your time and therefore your money. I think you can very easily teach yourself AutoCAD and SketchUp at home, but I think with AutoCAD, it's probably better to do a course to get more out of the program. Because when you start getting to the parts of, this is what I have drawn and now I want to print it and give it to a client, you can certainly teach yourself that at home. But to get a better quality product with more beautiful line weights and more kind of using graphics and colors within your AutoCAD in a course, that will be explained to you so quickly and so easily that you'll hit that ground much sooner than on your own.
Right, instead of spinning your wheels. Okay.
Yes.
And then, of course, every season of our lives and of our career is different. If somebody it's their side hustle and they don't really have clients in the pipeline, maybe they have days, every Saturday they can spend 6 hours doing this and they don't have the money, but they have the time. And then other people may have a little bit more expendable money and less time. And so therefore, but it sounds like it's smart to get some sort of course or education on it. Okay. I love it. I think it's amazing. So those are the four basic ones to get somebody off the ground. I know that you also use Photoshop, Lightroom, InDesign, and Illustrator. Are they things that we should take a minute for, or those are like, past beginner level and don't bother yet? Get these other things off the ground first.
With those programs, they're more, for me, how I use them. Yeah, more enhancements, more graphics. So after I've produced my render in Maxwell Render, I'll take it into Lightroom and start playing with it and pulling out the areas that I want more punchy, dropping down areas, making the light feel better, giving it a bit of a filter and stuff. InDesign, I particularly love for doing presentations. If you set yourself up some templates and you're putting your mood board together, or some, like the document that I sent to you, Luann, it's a really nice way of producing a beautiful document that looks quite sophisticated. And also when you do those templates, then you're continually giving your clients something that they understand and they get used to. And there's a certain comfort in that, I think. Whereas I think if you start doing stuff in, maybe, I know some people do their mood boards in PowerPoint, which is fantastic. I never liked that because I could never quite get the same consistency.
Okay.
Whereas I felt InDesign gave me that.
Okay. Well, and what I heard in there is that you are subliminally setting the tone. Every communication and every presentation you do, whether it's a Word document, not a Word like using it as an actual Microsoft term, but whether it's a printed document, a document of words.
Yes.
Things have meanings now that they didn't used to, right? So, but like you just expressed, you sent back all of the questions that I sent, answered, and it was in this beautiful presentation of a thing instead of just typed out. Now, by the way, everybody listening, I don't require that when you send that to me, believe me. But you are setting the tone with every interaction of the level of the quality that you deal in, you're the lane that you swim in is just this much nicer, this much finer, this much more professional, and you don't reserve it for just the presentation of the space. You do it in everything you do. Yes. I like it. That's really something.
And I want to be proud of my work.
Yes.
Be that an email I send to clients or a document I send them. Everything's a representation of what they're purchasing.
And what you're saying is because that's on one hand can sound like, oh my goodness, I got to make everything look good. But what you're describing is once you learn a program like InDesign and you have your templates built, for you, it's no different if you do it there or if you had answered me in a Word doc by Microsoft, right? It's like you're just now typing your answers, but it's coming to me in this beautiful templated, color, coded presentation.
Absolutely. And they all start in Microsoft Words.
Oh, and you
they
just
then get they copied into InDesign to then take them to the next level of being laid out and easy to follow. Which I hope is something that came to you when I sent you that document.
Yes.
That I was feeding you back the information, not as you requested, but as following your pattern and then letting it be understood as clearly as you gave it to me.
Yes. Yeah. No, it's terrific. And I can appreciate that if I were a client receiving a document back from you instead of just this white page with all these black letters and no organization, that this color coding, this gridding and this templating really did direct me to where you wanted me to go, which is very nice and interesting.
Good.
Yes.
Glad to hear that.
Yes. So I have to say, I have just loved talking with you. Thank you so much. I appreciate you're also sharing your expertise with all of that technology. And I just think it is just the most amazing coincidence that email came yesterday. I asked you today, and your answer was, I actually teach this stuff.
Yep. So it's amazing how the coincidence in life all line up.
That's it. It is the truth. Well, Jason, thank you. So I will include your website in the show notes and everything. It's jasonbyrnedesign.com, correct?
That's the one. Thank you very much.
Yep. jasonbyrnedesign.com. And, your work is beautiful. It's all the different shops and so forth that you've done, and the stores that you've done are really terrific. And so if you're listening and you are aspiring or you are a commercial designer and you love the idea of retail design for shopkeepers and so forth, Jason has a lot of inspiration for you there. So thank you so much for being here.
Pleasure. And Luann, I think a lot of us would say we're very grateful for your podcast and very grateful for you personally. So thank you for everything that you're doing for everybody. We're really grateful, and I'm incredibly grateful.
No, it's my pleasure. I love doing it. It's a blast. I love meeting people just like you. Every day makes my life just so happy and fulfilled. So thank you for sharing that, though. Thank you.
No worries.
Well, it's all about the action, isn't it? It's all about the doing. Believe me, I know you have been inspired, not by one, not by two, not by three, but by dozens of the guests of the podcast to do better, to be better in your business. I know it because you tell me all the time. What I want to know is those lists of ideas that you have, those notebooks that you have filled with ideas, how many of these items have a check mark next to them? Okay? Can you stand next to Jason Byrne and say, yep, I get it, because I did it too. Here's my list. Here's the things I've done, and this is how it has changed my business for the better. I hope you can. Take a look at your list today, okay? Before we go, I want to say a quick thank you to so many of you that came to Tampa to the IWCE conference and attended my seminars, How to Master the Art of the High Ticket Sale, and my co-seminar with Madeline McRae on how to set sales goals in 2018. There were so many of you there that we had such a good time, but I'm going to, at the top of my head, give some shout outs to Kylie Italiano, Mickey, Lindsay and Bob Anderson, Lori Carpenter, Sherry Corey, Cheryl and Kim from Canada, Peggy from Rochester, Michelle Jennings and Kristen. There were so many of you. It was so much fun, and I really do thank you. Keep in mind, the next event we're on to is High Point Market. That's right. Please bring your copy of my new book, The Making of a Well-Designed Business, and join us at the Kravitz Showroom on Monday, April 16th at 1 o'clock for a beautiful lunch sponsored by Kravitz and My Doma Studio. All right, we're going to get a chance to hang out and talk and meet each other. Thank you so much for joining me again today. Go decide, what are you going to do today? Okay? Decide to be excellent. Thank you so much for joining me again today. This podcast is a production of WindowWorks, your resource for custom window treatments and awnings. To learn how we can help you on your next interior design project, go to www.windowworks-nj.com. And if you're interested in working with me on your business, either through masterminds or one-on-one coaching, or you want to know how to get my book, The Making of a Well-Designed Business, or you just want to know what's going on in the podcast land and where I'm going to be, all of that is found at luannigara.com. Thank you so much. Have an excellent day.